The first shot was fired with no warning. In the quiet vacuum of space, an ancient predator ship, a blackened, jagged silhouette of gleaming metal, hurtled through the cosmos, its engines roaring like the growl of a great beast. It was the apex of destruction, an embodiment of a species that had conquered countless worlds. No one had ever dared challenge them. No one had ever survived them. The ship, named the Last Hunt, was one of many in the vast armada of the Verlith, a race that had been feared across the stars for eons. They were not conquerors in the traditional sense. No, the Verlith were predators. They hunted the galaxy's most dangerous prey and collected trophies from the most formidable civilizations they'd ever encountered. Their empire wasn't one of government or diplomacy, but of survival of the fittest. They believed in the supremacy of their species, a philosophy passed down through generations, encoded in their DNA. The first shot was fired just outside the orbit of a small human colony on the fringe of the galaxy, a system known only as Viridia. The Verlith had long since scouted this territory, and it was ripe for the taking. The humans who had settled there were soft, untested by the brutality of the cosmos. Perfect prey. As the energy beam sliced through the void and struck the planet's atmosphere, the shockwave of destruction radiated across the sky. For a moment, the human settlers had no idea what was happening. They only saw the streak of light across the heavens before the earth shook beneath their feet. The next moment, the ground erupted in fire. Buildings collapsed. Panic spread. And then, the fleet arrived. Hundreds of sleek, predatory ships descended from the black abyss, their hulls like sharpened claws. They unleashed their deadly payload on the unsuspecting colony, reducing everything in their path to smoldering ruins. The humans had no means to fight back. Their defense systems were outdated, their ships unprepared. The Verlith didn't even need to land to claim victory. They had always been efficient hunters. It was the perfect kill. But there was something the Verlith didn't expect. Something that had never been a part of their calculations. Humanity fought back. A ragtag fleet of outdated human warships, cobbled together from various colonies and defense systems, powered through the void. They were weak compared to the Verlith, but there was something about their resistance that caught the Predator's attention. Despite being outgunned and outclassed, they fought with a fire the Verlith hadn't seen before, a ferocity, a refusal to die. Captain Arath, the leader of the Last Hunt, watched from his command center as the human ships rallied together, launching their makeshift counterattack. He'd seen countless civilizations crumble before him. Yet here were these small, insignificant creatures, their ships barely more than floating scrap, somehow managing to inflict damage on his forces. He scoffed. It wasn't possible. They had no place in this war. What are they doing? Arath growled. His voice was a low, guttural sound that vibrated through the command center. His second-in-command, Vesh, stood at attention beside him, his antennae twitching. They're fighting back, Captain, Vesh said, unable to hide the shock in his voice. He had spent his entire career with the Verlith, watching as whole systems were reduced to ash, and yet these humans were somehow forcing them to retreat. At least momentarily. Aratha's lip curled in disdain. Let them waste their energy. They are nothing but ants beneath our boots. Yet, as the hours passed and the humans continued to strike back, hurting, bleeding, but not surrendering, Aratha's confidence began to waver. There was something about this humanity, something that could not be explained by simple instinct or survival, something that no predator had ever encountered before. The human fleet, in desperation, made a risky maneuver. Their ships broke formation and dove into the heart of the enemy fleet, a suicidal tactic designed to catch the Verlith off guard. Arath had seen such foolishness before. The humans would be crushed in seconds. But instead of panicking, they adapted. They fought with a new kind of instinct, a brutal efficiency that surprised even the Verlith. Their ships wove in and out of enemy fire, using every possible advantage. They acted not as soldiers, but as creatures in a wild hunt. The Verlith were losing more ships than they cared to admit. Arath clenched his fists, watching the chaos unfold. What are they? He muttered to himself. The humans didn't just survive, they were adapting faster than he could track. For the first time in his long career, Arath was afraid. Not of losing. He had lost battles before, and it meant nothing. But this was something else. This was a species unlike any he had ever faced before. And he could feel the shift in the wind. The hunt was no longer certain. And for the first time in centuries, Arath wondered if the Verlith were truly the apex predators of the galaxy, or if the humans were about to rewrite the rules. The humans had no idea who they were up against. Arath watched the small human fleet approach, their ships forming a loose, almost chaotic formation. On paper, they didn't stand a chance. Their vessels were cobbled together, designed for survival, not war. They didn't have the raw firepower, the technological superiority, or the strategic brilliance of the Verlith. Yet, something about their behavior intrigued him, something the Verlith had never encountered before. A strange, unshakable resolve that refused to buckle. As the last hunt and its fleet prepared for a coordinated counterstrike, Aratha's mind raced. Every part of him screamed that this should be easy. But his instincts, honed by centuries of conquest, were now screaming something else. This would not be easy. The human fleet closed in. They launched a barrage of missiles, primitive by Verlith standards, but the sheer unpredictability of their trajectory made them difficult to track. Aratha's tactical systems locked onto the incoming projectiles, but the humans' erratic movements prevented them from locking in a single, predictable pattern. They weren't acting like soldiers, they were acting like prey, weaving and darting in unpredictable directions, never giving the predators a clear shot. And then, in a move no one expected, the humans launched a counteroffensive. The fleet scattered, breaking into smaller, more agile groups. Each ship's movements were unpredictable, chaotic, and yet, somehow synchronized. Aratha's first officer, Vesh, barked orders, trying to maintain formation, but the enemy's strategy was disrupting everything. "Captain, their ships, they're scattering," Vesh reported, his voice tinged with panic. "This makes no sense. They should be retreating, not." "Don't talk. Watch," Arath cut him off. His eyes narrowed as he studied the human ships on his screen. The human fleet's disorganized behavior wasn't a sign of weakness. It was an adaptation. Arath had seen it before in the wilds of the galaxy, a species that fought not with coordination, but with primal survival instincts. These humans weren't following any known strategy. They were inventing one on the fly, and it was throwing off the Verlith's most advanced systems. In an instant, one of the human ships veered into the path of a predator cruiser, diving directly at it, as though it were attempting a suicidal ram. Aratha's tactical display flashed a warning, and his crew scrambled to engage countermeasures. But the human ship didn't follow through. Instead, it released a swarm of small drones, which latched onto the predator vessel's hull, jamming critical systems and disabling weaponry. Foolish. Arath spat. He felt his confidence slipping, the momentary defeat igniting his rage. "Are they retreating now?" Vesh asked, his voice desperate, but it was too late. The humans were far from retreating. A second wave of ships had slipped under the radar, darting toward the predator's flanks and launching their limited but concentrated energy weapons. The Verlith ships, while powerful, struggled to counter the precise, fast-moving attacks from multiple directions. "Engage them with everything we have," Arath bellowed. The last hunt, weapon systems came to life, unleashing destruction in all directions. But the humans were already on the move again, their strategy fluid, as though they were reacting to Aratha's every decision. For the first time in his long career, the Verlith captain had the unsettling feeling that the humans knew what he was thinking before he did. He stared at the human ships, each one appearing like a wounded animal, trying to survive by making unpredictable, desperate moves. But this was not the behavior of weak prey. This was the behavior of something far more dangerous, a species that refused to die. "I don't understand it," Arath muttered, his mind struggling to process the chaos. The human ships had no finesse, no precision. Their tactics were clumsy, but effective. They were fighting with a rawness that felt like desperation, but there was an underlying intelligence in the chaos. Another human ship, one of their larger warships, suddenly pivoted in a sharp turn, barely evading a direct hit from a Predator destroyer. It unleashed a concentrated burst of energy directly into the weak spot of the Predator's shields. The shields flickered, failing to absorb the impact. The Predator ship veered off course, damaged, and Arath felt his pulse quicken. His flagship was damaged. He had underestimated them. "Captain," Vesh said, a note of uncertainty in his voice, "we've lost communication with 3 of our frontline vessels. They've been boarded by the humans." "Impossible," Arath growled, his fist slamming onto the console. "No one gets on my ship." But the humans were already proving that wasn't true. In the chaos of their assault, they had managed to breach Predator lines, boarding several ships. Reports came in from all over the fleet. Humans had infiltrated Predator vessels, overwhelming their crews with surprise tactics. Arath had always believed that the Verlith were the ultimate hunters. But as he watched the human ships continue to outwit and outfight them, something shifted inside him. He wasn't facing just another prey species. These humans had something else, something wild, untamed, and terrifyingly resilient. "Prepare for a full retreat," Arath ordered, his voice cold despite the fury bubbling beneath the surface. "This hunt is far from over, but we will not be humiliated." But as the humans pressed their advantage, Arath couldn't help but wonder. Was it the humans who were the hunters now? The creature's eyes were the last thing anyone saw. The Verlith had never needed to fight fair. They were hunters, and they had perfected the art of tracking and eliminating their prey. So, when Captain Arath realized that the humans were not going to be intimidated into submission, he knew it was time to bring in the one weapon that had never failed him, a living weapon. The Predator was known as the Hunter. It was bred for one purpose: to track and eliminate any species that dared defy the Verlith. A towering figure, its skin was a mesh of hardened scales and sleek muscle, designed for both stealth and brute force. With claws capable of slicing through the toughest materials, and eyes that could see in every spectrum of light, it was the ultimate killer. The Hunter was not bound by the limitations of technology. It was nature, honed into perfection. Arath stood before the containment chamber as the Hunter was released into the wilds of Viridia, the human colony. The planet was still in chaos, the survivors scrambling to regroup after the last assault. The humans had no idea what was coming for them. "Are you sure this will work?" Vesh asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. He had seen the Hunter in action before, but never against something so unpredictable. Arath's eyes gleamed with cold confidence. "Humans think they can outwit us. They have no idea what they're up against." The chamber doors opened, and the Hunter stepped forward, its long, predatory limbs unfolding with ease. Its massive jaws snapped open in a low growl as it inhaled the scent of its prey. It had been starved for this moment, and it was more than ready to hunt. The Hunter was unleashed. On the surface of Viridia, the humans scrambled. They had no time to repair their defenses, no time to reassemble their fleets. They were disorganized, but they were far from defenseless. Their commander, now known to the Verlith as an unpredictable force of nature, had already started to plan their next move. "We need to find out what we're dealing with," the human commander, Captain Alara, ordered. She stood at the helm of her command ship, her eyes sharp and calculating despite the chaos around her. "Don't engage until we know what we're up against. Stay hidden." But hiding was no longer an option. The Hunter had already begun its pursuit, moving through the dense jungles of Viridia with deadly precision. Every step was calculated, its senses hyper-alert to the slightest movement. It tracked the humans as if they were nothing more than insects to be crushed. As it moved through the underbrush, the Hunter's eyes locked onto the first human patrol, a small squad of soldiers sent out to assess the damage. The humans hadn't even realized they were being stalked until it was too late. A low growl rumbled through the jungle, and before they could react, the Hunter lunged from the shadows. Claws slashed through the air, catching one soldier across the chest, tearing through armor as if it were paper. The rest of the squad barely had time to scream before the creature descended upon them. Alara, watching the tracking feed from her ship, knew the reports were grim. The hunter had already killed 3 patrols. Her fingers clenched into fists. "We can't outrun it," she said, determination hardening her voice. "We need a plan, and we need it now." The humans, having underestimated the full scope of the enemy, quickly realized their mistake. A direct confrontation was impossible. The hunter was too fast, too strong. It would tear through their defenses with ease. But Captain Alara was no ordinary leader. She'd seen her share of impossible odds and always found a way through. She wasn't going to let her people be slaughtered by a creature that should never have been unleashed. Her eyes narrowed as she began formulating a plan, something unexpected, a tactic the Verlith would never anticipate. "Alara, to all units," she called over the comms, her voice calm but commanding. "We'll fight back, but we need to use the environment. We can't match it in strength, but we can outsmart it. Stay mobile. Use the terrain. Disrupt its tracking." The humans scattered, disappearing into the dense jungle, their movements more fluid and coordinated now. They set traps, used decoys, and employed tactics designed to confuse the hunter. They were no longer acting as prey. They were adapting, just like they had in space. But the hunter was relentless. Its senses were razor-sharp, and despite the humans' best efforts, it slowly cornered them. Every trap they set, every attempt to deceive it, only delayed the inevitable. It was no longer a question of if the hunter would kill them. It was a question of how long they could survive. Captain Arath observed the unfolding events from his ship, his expression unreadable. His weapon was doing exactly what it was bred to do. But something unsettled him. Despite the carnage, despite the deaths, the humans were fighting back in ways he hadn't predicted. They were starting to look less like prey and more like a worthy adversary. It was no longer a hunt, it was a war. Captain Arath paced the command deck of the last hunt, his claws clicking against the metal floor in frustration. The once indomitable Verlith fleet had been shaken. The humans had fought their way through ambush after ambush, setting traps, making unexpected strikes, and surviving longer than any species before them. The hunter, his ultimate weapon, had failed to wipe out the human resistance. If anything, it had only provoked them to fight harder. "They adapt too quickly," Arath muttered, running a hand through his crests in agitation. "How can they know what we'll do before we do it?" Vesh, ever the loyal second in command, watched his captain's movements warily. "Perhaps we underestimated them," he suggested. The words felt almost blasphemous, but the evidence was undeniable. The Verlith had underestimated the humans at every turn. The situation had reached a tipping point. The human forces were no longer retreating. They weren't simply surviving. They were actively reclaiming lost ground. Arath had ordered full strikes on their colonies, expecting to break their morale. Instead, the humans fought back with a ferocity that felt like vengeance. They were no longer afraid. They were angry, and they were learning how to hurt the Verlith. "Tell me everything," Arath commanded, his voice tight with a simmering rage. "We've lost contact with several of our outer patrols," Vesh reported, tapping at a control panel. "The humans have begun to target our weak points, specifically our communication hubs and power stations. They don't attack in large groups anymore. It's smaller guerrilla tactics." Arath stared at the map of Viridia, watching the human ships move in unpredictable patterns. It was as if they were everywhere at once, constantly shifting, constantly adapting. The Verlith's strategy of overwhelming force was losing its edge. They were becoming predictable to the humans. The news only deepened Arath's frustration. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. The Verlith had never been challenged like this. No species had ever fought back in such a disorganized, relentless way, defying everything the predators knew about war. The humans didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like creatures of instinct. And that made them terrifying. "They don't think like us," Arath said, more to himself than to Vesh. His mind was working faster now. "They fight not with tactics, but with desperation, with passion." Vesh hesitated, knowing the risks of suggesting anything that might go against Arath's pride. Perhaps it's time to consider a different approach. We could call for reinforcements." "No," Arath snapped, cutting him off. "The Verlith do not run from battle. If we cannot break them with force, we'll break them with fear." Fear. It was the ultimate weapon the Verlith had always wielded. No species had ever dared to face them directly. They had crushed civilizations not by brute strength alone, but by making their enemies fear them before the first shot was ever fired. The Verlith were shadows, whispers in the dark. No one had ever stood against them and survived. Until now. Arath's mind worked through his options. He wasn't just fighting for victory anymore. He was fighting for his reputation. The Verlith's place in the galaxy had always been unchallenged. If these humans managed to defeat him, to make him retreat, everything would change. "Prepare the fleet," Arath said, his voice like ice. "We strike at the heart of their colonies. I want every ship in position. The humans won't expect it." The human commander, Captain Alara, had played their game long enough. It was time to show her the true meaning of fear. The attack came without warning. In the dead of night, while the human forces were regrouping, the Verlith descended upon them with a fury that could not be matched. Arath had chosen the most vulnerable human colony, a small outpost on the outskirts of Iridia, surrounded by mountains and dense jungles. The humans thought they were safe, but they had made a fatal mistake. They had grown complacent. As the Verlith fleet dropped from orbit, unleashing hellfire upon the colony, Alara's comms lit up with frantic reports. "Captain, the enemy is here. They've breached our outer defenses." She didn't flinch. The sound of explosions rattled the command deck as she calmly assessed the situation. The Verlith had underestimated her people before, but this time they would learn. "Activate Plan Delta," she ordered. The human forces had been preparing for this moment, when the Verlith would try to crush them all at once. The humans didn't have the numbers to match the Predator fleet, but they had the one thing the Verlith lacked: adaptability. Plan Delta was a strategy of pure chaos. The human ships scattered, their movements wild and unpredictable. Small fighter groups darted between the towering ruins, using the environment to their advantage. The larger warships deployed decoys, distracting the enemy with false signals and leading them into traps. In the midst of chaos, Ilara's voice came over the comms once more, steady and clear. "We won't go down without making them pay. Fight back, every one of you." Arath watched as his fleet struggled to adapt to the human counterattack. Their guerrilla tactics were infuriating, like trying to catch smoke with bare hands. The Verlith were strong, but they weren't prepared for this kind of war. The humans weren't fighting to win, they were fighting for survival. And it was starting to show. The Verlith were losing their grip. For the first time, Arath saw the shadow of doubt fall over his crew. He clenched his fists, fury rising. No one had ever forced him to doubt his command. The Verlith had always been feared. But the humans had broken the one thing the Verlith held dear: their reputation. The war had just begun, but already Arath knew nothing would ever be the same again. The final strike was coming, and Earth had no time left. The Verlith fleet, battered but still formidable, began its descent toward Earth. Arath had made his decision. If they were to break the humans once and for all, there was no more room for hesitation. Earth was the heart of humanity's strength, the last bastion of their resistance. If they could destroy it, they could destroy everything. It wasn't just a battle, it was an execution. The humans, however, weren't blind to the threat. Ilara, standing on the bridge of her flagship Pride of Iridia, knew that this would be their final stand. Earth was unprotected, and the Verlith were closing in fast. They had no reinforcements to call upon, no new tactics to rely on. It was a direct confrontation, and the odds were overwhelming. But Ilara had one thing the Verlith didn't: humanity's will to fight. "Captain, we're receiving their fleet's coordinates," her communications officer reported, eyes wide. "They're coming in fast, full force." Ilara took a deep breath, her voice steady. "Prepare all defenses. We're going to make them regret ever coming here." The fleet assembled in orbit, their defenses already in place. Earth's greatest weapon was not its technology, nor its military. It was its people. Against all odds, humanity had found ways to modify their ships, adapt their weapons, and fight in ways no one had expected. This was their home, and they would defend it until their last breath. As the Verlith fleet appeared on the horizon, Aratha's voice crackled over the comms. "Humans, you fought well, but your resistance ends here. You should have surrendered when you had the chance. Now you'll witness the true power of the Verlith." Alara stood firm. "We don't surrender. We fight." The battle began with a fury. The Verlith ships unleashed a torrent of firepower, pounding the human defenses with everything they had. But the humans were ready. Their smaller, more agile warships darted around the larger predator vessels, launching wave after wave of missiles, each one aimed with deadly precision. One of the human dreadnoughts, Liberty's Edge, fired a concentrated energy beam directly at the heart of a predator cruiser. The shot landed with a resounding explosion, tearing through the cruiser's hull and sending debris flying. The Verlith had underestimated humanity's resolve, and now they were beginning to pay the price. Arath snarled in disbelief. "Impossible. How are they still fighting like this?" The humans weren't just fighting back, they were fighting smarter. They had taken advantage of every weakness the Verlith had exposed, adjusting their tactics mid-battle, staying one step ahead. But it wasn't just their technology or tactics that kept them going. It was their desperation, their refusal to lose. It was something the Verlith had never considered when they started their invasion. The humans were fighting for their survival, and there was nothing more dangerous than a species that had nothing left to lose. The battle raged on, the vastness of space illuminated by explosions and energy beams. Ships were falling on both sides, but the Verlith were losing more. Aratha's fleet was faltering. Their tactical systems were overwhelmed by the constant barrage of attacks from all angles. And even worse, the human fleet was not breaking. No matter how much damage they took, no matter how many lives were lost, the humans kept coming. On the surface of Earth, the world watched in terror as the skies darkened with the shadow of the enemy fleet. But they also watched as their people, the very heart of humanity, rose to the occasion. Every human on Earth, every soldier, every civilian, knew that their fate was bound to the outcome of this battle. And so they fought not just with weapons, but with everything they had. The Earth itself seemed to rise up with them. As the last human dreadnought, Defiance, locked onto Aratha's flagship, Alara's voice rang out across the comms. "This is it. Let's make it count." With a final coordinated strike, the human fleet launched everything they had left. The weaponized payloads, enhanced by the sheer will of humanity's determination, ripped through the Predator fleet's defenses. One by one, Predator ships exploded, their crews unable to react fast enough to the humans' relentless assault. Aratha's ship, the Last Hunt, was struck directly by a human missile, crippling its main reactor. The ship shuddered, groaning under the strain of the impact. Aratha's eyes widened in disbelief. For the first time in his life, he was staring at the very real possibility of defeat. "This is impossible," he hissed, his voice raw with disbelief. "We are the apex predators. How can we be losing to these insects?" But the humans were no longer the prey. They had turned the tide of the war, and Arath, with all his strength and power, could do nothing to stop it. Earth had survived. The humans had won. But as the battle ended, Alara stood at the helm of her ship, her gaze fixed on the dark expanse of space. She knew this victory wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The universe was watching, and humanity had just proven that they would never, ever back down. The silence that followed the battle was deafening. For the first time in centuries, the Verlith fleet lay in ruin. Arath, leader of the predator species, was now a broken figure, his once unshakable confidence shattered. His ship, the Last Hunt, was drifting through space, crippled beyond repair. The human resistance had not only survived, they had triumphed. Earth had been saved, and humanity had proven they were no longer prey. Arath stood in the ruined command center of his ship, staring at the shattered remains of the universe he once ruled. The vast emptiness of space seemed to mock him. The humans had turned the tide, fighting with a ferocity that defied logic, a determination that had broken through the very core of the Verlith Empire. "Captain," Vesh's voice was weak, tinged with the exhaustion of failure. "We've lost everything. The fleet is gone. The humans, they're still coming." Aratha's eyes darkened with rage, but there was no fire left in his voice. The truth was undeniable. The humans had done the impossible. They had turned the tables on a species that had never known defeat. And now, as his fleet limped back to the farthest corners of the galaxy, Arath was left with the bitter taste of humiliation. The human commander, Elara, had achieved what no other species ever could. She had not only withstood the Verlitha's onslaught, but had become the symbol of human resistance, a force that could not be crushed. The humans had taken their victory and carved it into the stars, a message for all to see. Arath clenched his fists. "How could we have been so blind?" he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "We underestimated them at every turn. We thought they were weak, fragile." Vesh hesitated before speaking. "They're not just weak, Captain. They're unpredictable. They fight without reason, without fear. We've never seen anything like it." Arath turned away, looking out into the vastness of space. The Verlith had spent eons perfecting their hunt, but what had made them successful was the same thing that had led to their downfall: their belief in their superiority. They had never truly faced an enemy that fought with such relentless, raw energy. The humans had shown him something that he had never anticipated. "They're not like us," Arath finally admitted, his voice quiet. "They don't fight to dominate. They fight to survive. They fight because they have no other choice." The realization hit him like a wave. The humans had survived countless odds because they were not bound by the same principles that governed the Verlith. They fought with heart, with a passion that the predators had long since abandoned. They didn't need to conquer the galaxy. They simply needed to protect what was theirs. "Do you think we've learned anything from this?" Vesh asked, his voice filled with doubt. "Can we go back to the way things were?" Arath shook his head slowly. "No, we can't. The universe is changing, Vesh. The humans are not just another species. They are a force. And we are no longer the apex predators." Back on Earth, Elara stood before a council of human leaders, watching the stars outside the observation window. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The universe was vast, and humanity had only just begun to make its mark. But they had proven something important today. The galaxy could no longer look at Earth as a mere backwater planet. They were a force to be reckoned with, a species that would fight with everything they had to survive, to protect their home. "The Verlith were just the beginning," Elara said, turning to face the council. "We've shown them we can stand against the worst the galaxy has to offer. But there are others out there, others who will come for us. We need to be ready." And so, the next phase of humanity's rise began. They would rebuild, they would fortify, and they would stand guard over their world. No longer the prey, they had become the hunters. The universe would remember the day Earth stood up to the predators, and that memory would shape the future. A new era had begun, and humanity was at its center.